get started. My name is Jack Johnson. I'm the chair of the board of the Miami Design Preservation League, and I'd like to welcome you to Art Deco Weekend. Art Deco Weekend is... does that mean you want me to sit down now? Art Deco Weekend is proud of our partnership with the Wolfsonian, which brings you this lecture series, and we hope that you will spend today and tomorrow at Art Deco Weekend and at this lecture series, learning a lot about Art Deco and about the architectural heritage of Miami Beach. While you're at it, if you aren't a member of the Miami Design Preservation League yet, please join. It's really easy to do during Art Deco Weekend. You simply text Art Deco to 44321. I think you can remember that number, 44321. Memberships cost just $25 during the festival. So please support our efforts to preserve, protect, and promote the architectural heritage of Miami Beach. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael, who's going to introduce our speaker. You're going to be blown away by this lecture.
All right, Jack, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Hughes, and I'm the Development Director here at the Wolfsonian Florida International University. By attending today, you are welcome to go upstairs and see the galleries. It'll be a nice companion to Kathleen's talk. We have 3 exhibitions. What I think may be interesting to you is Deco from mass market to luxury, as well as Mickey Wolfson Collects, a universe of things, which are really quite extraordinary. And on the 5th floor, just off to the left, once you get off the gallery floor, which is the permanent collection, there's a small exhibition on Conrado Massaguer, a Cuban illustrator, which you might also find interesting. So as Jack was mentioning about membership in MDPL, you're certainly welcome to consider the Wolfsonian as well for membership, and there's materials outside. But without further ado, today we're presenting On the Cutting Edge, a talk by Kathleen Murphy-Skolnik. Ms. Skolnik teaches architectural history at Roosevelt University in Chicago and heads seminars on Art Deco design at the Newberry Library in Chicago. So Hildreth Meire's murals, mosaics, stained glass windows, beautify St. Bartholomew's Church, Radio City Music Hall, and St. Patrick's Cathedral, yet few know her name. It's very much a Wolfsonian topic. People know their work, but they don't know who did it. But she was a prominent designer and, of course, in an industry dominated by men. And so this afternoon, Ms. Skolnik will discuss Meire's work and the savvy business sensibilities that propelled her 40-year career. So Ms. Skolnik is a contributor to the recently published Art Deco Chicago, Designing Modern America. From 2008 to 2016, she was editor of the Chicago Art Deco Society magazine and currently serves on the advisory board of the Art Deco Society of New York. So please welcome Kathleen Skolnik to the Wolfsonian.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to the Wolfsonian and the Miami Design Preservation League for inviting me to be part of this exciting lecture series celebrating women and the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in this country. As Michael told you, the shero that I'll be speaking about today is the American muralist Hildreth Meire, who's shown in this 1943 self-portrait. I'm curious to know how many of you were familiar with the name Hildreth Meire before you read the description of today's lecture. A handful here, which is not surprising because she has not been very well known even among art and architectural historians, despite the fact that she was one of the most talented, prolific, and versatile American muralists of the first half of the 20th century. During her 40-year professional career, which extended from the early 1920s until her death in 1961, she completed approximately 100 commissions across the United States. She designed murals for office buildings, theaters, churches, government buildings, restaurants, bars, ocean liners, and World's Fair pavilions. And she worked in a wide variety of mediums, including paint, glass mosaic, marble mosaic, ceramic tile, terracotta, marble, metal, and stained glass. It is somewhat ironic to be speaking about Hildreth Meire as part of a lecture series focused on women, because Meire never wanted to be labeled as a woman artist. She considered herself to be simply an artist who just happened to be a woman. She didn't want to be singled out as a woman, and she didn't want or expect to be treated differently because she was a woman. In the early 1930s, the Architectural League of New York opened its membership to women, and Meire was one of the first women members. When the League suggested mounting an exhibition devoted exclusively to the work of the new women members, she was quick to voice her objections. She stated, somewhat sarcastically, "Why not have an exhibition of the work of all the bald-headed members? And another of all those having red hair. These distinctions are just as valid as those of sex." So she obviously didn't think that the work of women artists should be segregated from that of men. But despite comments like that, Meire understood and sympathized with the challenges that women artists face. In her early years as an aspiring young artist, she had experienced a number of disappointments related to the fact that she was a woman. She wanted to study at the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design in New York, and she couldn't because the Beaux-Arts Institute only accepted male students. And in 1920, she applied for a fellowship in painting at the American Academy of Rome, and she was rejected. Not because of any official policy against women or because she wasn't qualified, but because the American Academy didn't have housing accommodations for women in Rome. In a letter to her mother, she describes an exchange that she had with Grant Lafarge. She was the secretary of the American Academy. "I assured him that I considered myself the founder and president of the Association of Lady Applicants, and that when the doors were thrown open, that I would be found sitting on the top step," although Meire never did attend the American Academy. Meire felt that women artists were held to higher standards than their male counterparts. As she told a reporter for the New York Sun in 1932, "I think that a woman must know her job better than a man to get into this field." She also felt that women artists had to be more efficient than men. And if one woman fell down, it made it much harder for all the other women in the field. But at the same time, as an established artist, she did not feel that she was discriminated against as a woman. As she told the reporter for the New York Sun, "I am sure the architects with whom I have been working so long have forgotten the fact that I am a woman." Meire's success as an artist and as a woman artist was due to a combination of artistic talent and impressive business skills. She was very versatile, and although her Art Deco designs are among her most striking, she was also capable of designing in more traditional styles depending on the wishes and needs of her clients. And as I've already pointed out, she was also adept at designing in many different mediums. But she also understood the business aspects of mural painting. As she told the Pen and Brush Club in New York in 1950, the muralist has to practically run a business as well as conceive and paint decorations. And she recognized the difference between mural painting and easel painting. Easel painters, or picture painters, as she calls them here, could paint whatever they liked, and then hope that someone else liked it well enough to buy it. But muralists worked with clients, and their first priority was to please their clients. So they had to design not necessarily what they wanted, but what their client wanted. She also recognized the need for a high level of professionalism, which meant living up to her agreements and completing her contracts on time, even if it meant working long hours. And she understood the importance of cooperation with architects and clients and assistants and craftsmen. Mural painting is a cooperative game. She told attendees at a 1935 conference. Muralists had to be able to get along well with others, and an artistic temperament was a drawback for a muralist. And this professionalism did not go unrecognized. Ralph Walker, an architect with whom Meire frequently collaborated, had this to say about her in an interview for American Artist in 1941. "I much prefer to work with Miss Meire than with any artist I know. She will take any commission you give her and work it out with any help from you. Clean quality, good draftsmanship, material intelligently used. Once the job is in her hands, you can forget about it, assured that it will be done right and done on time. There is absolutely nothing temperamental about her. She doesn't have to be expedited over the parts she may not happen to enjoy doing, nor is she worried about the mortality of her work." Hildreth Meire was born in 1892 in New York, in Flushing, Queens. Here's a very young Hildreth. Her mother was the former Marie Hildreth, whose maiden name was the source of Hildreth's rather unusual first name. Marie, or Minnie, as the family called her, had studied art in Paris and at the Art Students League of New York, but she put aside any thoughts of an artistic career when she married Ernest Meire. Although after her marriage, she continued to paint for her own enjoyment, and she instilled a love of art in her two daughters, Hildreth, shown here with Minnie on the left, and her younger sister Lloyd on the right. Hildreth attended the Academy of the Sacred Heart, a Catholic girls' boarding school in Manhattan, in a neighborhood known at the time as Manhattanville. Today it's more commonly referred to as West Harlem. Her artistic talent was already apparent during her school days. In the sketches that she made of school life, here are two of them, and in costumes that she designed for school parties. By the time that she graduated, here's her graduation photo, and Meire is standing at the center. She's standing at the center of the back row. By the time she graduated, she had decided that she wanted to be an artist, which very much pleased her mother. Soon after graduation, Minnie took Hildreth to Florence, where she spent a year studying with an English artist. This time in Florence had a great impact on the direction that her career would take. When she left New York, she was planning to be a portrait painter. But after seeing what she would later describe as the great, beautiful walls of Florence, meaning the Renaissance frescoes, she decided that she wanted to paint murals. When she came back to New York, she continued her studies at the Art Students League of New York until her father's health caused the family to move to California, where she enrolled in the California Institute of Fine Arts. Let me go back for a second. How she got back to New York and began her career as a muralist is, I think, a very interesting story. Meire always loved the performing arts, especially dance and the theater. When she went to these performances, she would closely observe the actors and the dancers and make mental notes, and then later she would turn those mental images into sketches. This is a sketch that she made of the Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova when she was performing in San Francisco, and Pavlova even signed the sketch. And this is the Canadian-born actress Margaret Anglin, who was appearing at the Greek Theater in Berkeley during the summer of 1915. That summer, Meire took some of her sketches to a San Francisco framer to have them mounted. And it just so happened that a member of Anglin's company was in the same shop, saw her sketches, told Anglin about them. Anglin asked to meet Meire, and after seeing more of her work, she asked her if she would come to rehearsals and make more sketches, which Meire agreed to do. And at the end of the season, Anglin purchased all of her sketches. She also asked Meire if she would be interested in relocating to New York to design costumes and sets for a series of upcoming plays that Anglin was scheduled to appear in. And that is how, in January of 1916, 23-year-old Hildreth Meire found herself traveling alone on a cross-country train from California to New York. She spent her first few nights at the convent associated with the school that she had attended, but within a few days she had a room in a residence hotel. And during her early years in New York, she worked not only for Anglin, but for other companies as well. These are costumes that she designed for a Metropolitan Opera production of Canterbury Pilgrims. During World War I, Meire wanted to do something to help the war effort. She enlisted in the Navy, and she was assigned to the Brooklyn Naval Yard as an architectural draftsman. But her sights were always set on becoming a muralist. And after her discharge from the Navy, she started taking steps to achieve this goal. This is the time when she wanted to go to the Beaux-Arts Institute of Design and couldn't because she was a woman. So she enrolled instead at the School of Applied Design for Women, where she was pleased to learn that although she couldn't go to the Beaux-Arts Institute, she could participate in the Institute's design competitions, which were open to students from other schools. These competitions were in the form of design problems formulated by New York architects and sometimes based on projects that they were working on. Meire excelled in these competitions, consistently winning first and second place winners, or medals rather, and they led to 2 actual commissions. Painted panels based on the 4 seasons that she designed for a breakfast room in a house on Park Avenue, and here are 2 of them, and a mural for the ceiling of a living room of a residence on the Upper East Side. In 1921, Meire received an introduction to the New York architect Bertram Grosvenor Goodhue, and he launched her career by giving her her first major mural commission, the decoration of the Great Hall at the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. This is the National Academy of Sciences that Goodhue designed, and this is Meire's design for the Great Hall. The decorative program here was developed by members of the National Academy, and the theme was the history of science as it was known at the time. This is the early 20s. At the center of the dome is the sun, and it's surrounded by the 8 planets that were known at the time. And I think we're the symbols of the 8 planets. I think we're back to 8 planets now. I'm not sure if they're the same 8 planets, but this might once again be accurate. And then by personifications of the sciences. On the left are chemistry, astronomy, and physics, and on the right there's a detail of physics. And in the pendentives, which are those curved triangular sections at the base of the dome, are female representations of the elements. Here's water and fire, and air and earth. Meire's designs were originally to be executed in glazed ceramic tile, but that proved to be too expensive. So Bertram Goodhue came up with an alternative, what he called a new medium. He had Meire's designs applied to the acoustic tile covering the dome and the walls of the Great Hall with gesso, which is a mixture of plaster and glue. Artists use it to prime their canvases. And then the gesso created a raised effect, like a low relief sculpture. And then the gesso was painted and gilded. And I think this image of a decorative band in the Great Hall gives you an idea of the 3-dimensionality of the designs. Unfortunately, Bertram Goodhue never had the opportunity to see Meire's designs installed in the Great Hall because he died in April of 1924, just days before the dedication of the building. But before he died, he had selected Meire to design the interiors of the Nebraska State Capitol in Lincoln. And over the next 8 years, she worked with Goodhue's successor firm, Mayors Murray and Phillip, to design the interiors of the Nebraska State Capitol. The decorative program for the exterior and the interior of the Capitol, including Meire's murals, was developed by a University of Nebraska philosophy professor named Hartley Burr Alexander. Anybody ever heard of him? No, even fewer than heard of Meire. He considered himself to be an architectural iconographer, supposedly a term that he invented. So he put together a decorative program that was a 26-page, very meticulously detailed document describing the ornamentation of the interior and exterior of the Nebraska State Capitol. I could probably give an entire lecture on Meire's designs in Nebraska, but then I wouldn't have time to show you any of her other work. So I'm just going to give you a few highlights. This is the marble floor of the foyer. Alexander's theme here was a mythological interpretation of creation. At the entrance to the foyer is a rectangular panel with a Zeus-like figure. Alexander called him the genius of creative energy. And this is Meire's study for that panel. He's holding the reins of the cosmic forces and traveling through the universe, creating the sun and moon and stars and planets. And beyond him are the spirit of the soil, the spirit of vegetation, and the spirit of animal life. At the center of Meire's design for the marble floor of the rotunda is a Mother Earth figure. Alexander called her Terra Magna, and she's enthroned between industry and agriculture. Surrounding him are male personifications of the elements, and they're all linked by this giant guilloche, this continuous curvilinear band. And surrounding the elements are prehistoric life forms found in Nebraska that relate to that element. So for example, around air, you have birds and butterflies and flying reptiles. This is the dome of the rotunda, which is executed in glazed ceramic tile, and it shows the 8 virtues of the state. These winged female figures wearing helmets and holding hands to symbolize their mutual support. This was a space that was originally intended to be the Senate chamber, although it was used for other purposes once Nebraska went unicameral. And the theme here was the indigenous people of Nebraska, the Native Americans. The ceiling is divided into 4 quadrants, and within each one, Meire depicted Plains Indian traditions. Here's women hoeing and the buffalo hunt, the war party, and the peace council. Meire's work at the Nebraska State Capitol established her reputation as a muralist. It earned her a gold medal from the Architectural League of New York, and it led to many, many more commissions and many different types of commissions. Her first corporate commission was the marble floor for the banking hall of the Baltimore Trust Company in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. The theme here was modern Baltimore and its thriving economy. Although by the time the building opened in December of 1929, the economy wasn't thriving anymore. The stock market crash had occurred, and within a year, Baltimore Trust would have to vacate the building. Meire's design consists of 7 panels. 3 of them are purely geometric, 4 are figurative, like this one, the Baltimore Harbor, represented by this maiden from the classical past who's kneeling on the shore and guiding the ships safely to their berths. And in the background, you see the skyline of Baltimore. There's a tall building there with a mansard roof. That's the Baltimore Trust Company. And at the time, it was the tallest in the city. This is the Baltimore Rail Yard, looking like a distinguished Roman matron wearing this winged helmet and leaning against a locomotive wheel and holding a stretch of railroad track. And the Baltimore airport, kneeling on the tarmac, wearing an aviator's cap and goggles, and in the background you can see the planes and the control tower. Meire frequently collaborated with Ralph Walker, whom I mentioned earlier, the design partner with the firm of Voorhees, Mellon and Walker. And their first project together was the Red Room. This was a client reception room in the Irving Trust Company at 1 Wall Street, with the walls and the ceiling covered in shimmering glass mosaic. The jagged flame-like pattern was the work of Perry Coke Smith, a designer with the Walker firm. But Meire was the consultant on scale and color, which ranges from a deep red right above the marble dado to a brilliant golden orange on the ceiling. Meire's design for the ceiling of the lobby of the AT&T Long Distance Building on 6th Avenue in Tribeca, which was another collaboration with Walker, indicates her adaptability. Her original theme proposed for this mural was a day in the life of a telephone girl. Excuse me. As telecommunications expanded, more and more women were taking jobs as telephone operators. And these telephone girls, as they were called, were becoming icons of popular culture. Meire exhibited a full-scale study of her proposed design at an exhibition sponsored by the Architectural League of New York in 1931. And at that time, this photo appeared in a New York newspaper. As far as I know, it's the only image that exists of this mural because it was never executed. I don't have the original photo. This was scanned from an old newspaper clipping, so that's why it's so grainy. Meire showed a young woman waking up, having her morning coffee, getting dressed, and going to her job as a telephone operator. But the AT&T officials were not too pleased with this concept. They, as she explained later, they shied away from the bedroom scene. And they thought her design looked a little bit too much like a comic strip. They wanted something more traditional, with allegorical figures. So Meire, always ready to please her clients, went back to the drawing board and came up with a new concept, the continents linked by the telephone and wireless. And it does incorporate allegorical figures, but in Meire's hands, they're not these monumental female figures representing virtues and ideals like justice and charity that you see in late 19th and early 20th century murals. They're fresher and more modern. At the center of the ceiling, there are 2 female figures. You can only see one in this image. There's a condor hovering above her. The other one has, the other figure has an eagle above her. And they clasp these gold diagonal lines representing telephone and telegraph wires that extend to personifications of 4 continents at the periphery of the ceiling. Here's Australia on the left with a kangaroo and a sheep. And on the right, a kimono-clad Asia with a tiger and an elephant and pagodas in the background. Africa with 2 lions holding a fan and gesturing toward the pyramids. And a crowned Europe on the right, holding an orb and a scepter and leaning against an Ionic capital. And in the background, you can see the dome of St. Peter's Basilica and the towers of Notre Dame and a Roman aqueduct. This project gave Meire the opportunity to experiment with a new medium called silhouette mosaic. In silhouette mosaic, there's glass tiles or tesserae are used for outlines and details, and the spaces in between are filled with colored plaster. This is a much more economical approach than a solid mural, and that was important in a building that was being constructed in the early days of the Depression. And if anyone is familiar with the murals Rice did, he also used silhouette mosaic. Perhaps Meire's best-known designs are the roundels or circular sculptures that she designed for the 50th Street facade of Radio City Music Hall. And they represent song, drama, and dance. About half of all of Meire's designs were liturgical commissions. They were for houses of worship. In the late 1920s, she designed mosaics for the arch and the ark in the main sanctuary of Temple Emmanuel on 5th Avenue at 65th Street in New York. This is the exterior of Temple Emmanuel, and here's the sanctuary. It's absolutely breathtaking. For the arch, she designed stylized interpretations of Jewish symbols. Here's day 2 of creation. Here's the ram's horns, or shofars. You can also see the decorative bands to either side. At around this same time, she was designing mosaics for St. Bartholomew's, an Episcopal church on Park Avenue in New York. St. Bartholomew's was designed by Bertram Goodhue, who also designed the National Academy of Sciences and the Nebraska State Capitol. The church held its first services in 1918, but at that time the interior was unfinished because the church had run out of money. They didn't have the funds to complete the interior until the late 1920s, and by that time Bertram Goodhue had died. But Meire worked with his successor firm, Meire's Murray and Philip, to complete the interiors at St. Bartholomew's. Her mosaic for the half dome in the apse of the church depicted the Transfiguration, Christ's revelation of his divinity to 3 of his apostles. Just a quick drink of water here. The art committee of the church had asked that this mural be designed in what they called a primitive Byzantine style. And you see that reflected in the gold background and in the primarily frontal position of the figures. Although for me, these figures have a greater weightiness and solidity to them, and they're more natural than the figures that you often find in early Byzantine art, which tend to be very slender and elongated and very stylized, like the mosaics at San Vitale in Ravenna. Meire had greater artistic freedom in the mosaics that she designed for the narthex because the art committee did not request any specific style. And so she provided an Art Deco interpretation of the creation cycle. This is day 2, the creation of the heavens and separation of the waters. And this is one of my very favorite of all of Hildreth Meire's designs, with these droplets of water extending from that blue disc at the center through the stylized clouds into those wave-like forms in the pendentives. And this is day 5 and day 6, which was combined in the bay at the center of the narthex, which aligned with the main entrance to the church. So it's the creation of living creatures or animals and the creation of man. So you can see the hand of God at the center, and in the pendentives you have deer and fish and birds and man. In the late 1940s and the 1950s, Meire returned to St. Bartholomew to design 4 stained glass clerestory windows. They were based on the Canticles, which are passages of the Bible that were put to music. And this is the Gloria in Excelsis Deo window, which is based on the song that the angels sang at the birth of Christ. So in the central band, you have the Nativity. Above that, you have the Star of Bethlehem. Here below, you have the shepherds, who also appear at the bottom of the first and third bands. And you have the Magi. And in all of the windows, there's some reference to the musical nature of the canticles. So in this one, you have bagpipes, and over here you have some horns and pipes. During the Depression years, Meire received a commission from the Treasury Department's section on painting and sculpture, which was one of the New Deal programs created to help struggling artists during the Depression. This was a silhouette mosaic entitled The Post for the Logan Square Post Office in Chicago. And it shows the Roman messenger god, Mercury, flanked by the winds, guiding a letter to its recipient. Another Depression-era project was a terracotta frieze on the upper portion of one of the walls in an open interior courtyard in the Washington, D.C. Municipal Center. The title was Health and Welfare, and it depicted the services available to the residents of the District of Columbia. Here are just a few examples. In the upper left is food inspection. I really love the sheep over the butcher's shoulder. In the upper right is a geriatric ward. Below that, families are applying for social services. And on the bottom left, the municipal hospital. Meire had two commissions at the Century of Progress International Exposition held in Chicago in 1933-34. And one of them was a terracotta tile pool for the communications court. The communications court stood outside the communications hall, and it was marked by these four immense concrete pylons, which were painted green. They were referred to as the Great Green Towers. And at the center, you can see Meire's pool. Here's her design. It was entitled The Spirits of Communication, and it shows these classically inspired male and female figures racing around the globe and weaving a network of telephone and telegraph wires to unite the world in communication. Her other project for the Century of Progress is very relevant to the theme of this lecture series. It was a painted mural for the exhibition of the National Council of Women, and it was entitled The Progress of Women Through Organization, 1833 to 1933. And here you see the mural in place at the exhibition. The theme of the Century of Progress was science and technology, but a souvenir leaflet that was distributed at this exhibition stated that the gradual widening of women's activities until they have become powerful factors in the commercial and civic life of the day is almost as dramatic as the evolution of the machine itself. Without an exhibit of organized womanhood, the story of the machine age would be inadequately told. Meire's mural consisted of 3 panels. These are studies for those panels. And they were divided into 10 sections, each representing a decade, and within those decades, Meire depicted important struggles and advances relevant to women at the time. According to that souvenir leaflet, the women of 1833 were limited to the narrow confines of the home. But eventually they cross over the threshold and they acquire an education. They crusade for temperance. They comfort the slaves, aid the wounded on the battlefield during the Civil War. And anybody recognize the woman next to that in the red cape, the red stole? Susan B. Anthony. And she's fighting for women's suffrage. Women's organizations are formed. Women march for the vote. They enter the workforce, and they crusade for world peace. And at the end, Cleo, the muse of history, writes it all down on a stone tablet. The women of 1833 were shown against a background of closely spaced iron bars. But as time goes on, those bars widen, and eventually they disappear. When the exhibition ended, the National Council of Women donated the mural to Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. Over the years, the first two panels were lost. But the third panel, which represents the years 1903 to 1933, does remain, and it's now in the collection of the Smith College Museum of Art. Meire had 11 commissions for the New York World's Fair of 1939-40, and this was her favorite. This was a mixed metal sculpture entitled Hippocrates, the Father of Medicine, and the Dragon of Ignorance that stood over one of the entrances to the Science and Education building. And here you can see Hippocrates at the center, holding the torch of knowledge and banishing the dragon of ignorance and superstition that you see over on the left. In 1937, Meire painted 3 murals for the Westport Room, which was a Fred Harvey restaurant in Union Station in Kansas City. Instead of adopting an Art Deco design, she designed these murals in a more traditional style, which was very appropriate for the historic subject matter. The murals depicted Old Westport Landing, which was a pioneer settlement established in the 1840s. And here you see one of those murals, Commerce of the Prairies, in place in the Westport Room. And here is Meire's study for that mural. In 1956, Meire received the the Fine Arts Award from the American Institute of Architects, who recognized her as a master of murals. And this was the citation that accompanied that award. The world of art might write your name high on the list of the great among our painters, and write truly but not fully. Mosaic, terracotta, leaded glass, metal, gesso, these and still other media respond gratefully to the direction of your mind, heart, and hands. Your collaboration with architects and other artists brings more than the addition of beauty. It transfuses the joint concept and makes it indivisible. In accepting one more token, added to all the expressions of grateful appreciation your work has earned, you will permit us the realization that you are giving the Institute the greater honor. At around this same time, the late 50s, Meire was working on a large liturgical commission at the Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, which included the Dome of the 12 Apostles and the drinking deer on the wall behind the altar. She worked on this project for 15 years. She was working on it when she died on May 2nd, 1961. The architects and craftsmen with whom she was collaborating were not even aware that she was ill. She died of leukemia. But her legacy lives on in her designs. Fortunately, most of Meire's designs still exist today, a few exceptions, but most of them still exist. A few of them have been moved from their original location. And her legacy also lives on through the efforts of the International Hildreth Meire Association, which is an organization that was founded by her family to preserve her designs and to increase awareness of Meire and her work. Here's the address of their website, where you can find images of many, many more commissions than I was able to show you today. So I hope you will visit the website to see more of her work, and that you'll spread the news about this little-known artist who beautified so many of our public spaces. And you can also learn more about Hildreth Meire through this book that I co-authored, The Art Deco Murals of Hildreth Meire. It was published in 1914, and you can find it on Amazon. So thank you so much.
We have time for a couple of questions, so I'm going to let Kathleen take it away.
Yes?
First, thanks for bringing us two questions. How much of this did she do herself, or did she have a workshop for collaborators or fabricators, and was that difficult? And the second question is, could you fill in a little more of the blanks of what she was like as a person?
As far as the execution, she painted some of the murals. She also had assistants who helped her paint the murals. But in terms of, say, the mosaics, she did not do those herself. She worked a lot with a studio called Rambush. They were out of New Jersey, and they did a lot of the marble floors. They did mosaics and Ravenna mosaics, which I believe was located in St. Louis, but they were the American branch of a German company. So she worked very closely with the fabricators. She was always very, very involved in seeing that the work was properly executed. As far as what she was like as a person, she was not a feminist. She stated at one time that she was not a feminist, even though she didn't want to be identified as a woman artist, as I mentioned. She was married for a short time. She got married in the late 1920s. Her husband was European. He was described as a cavalryman and a landowner, but the marriage just didn't work out. They were married for a very short time, but married long enough to have a daughter who has really helped to preserve her legacy, saved so many letters and so many of her designs. She was, in her later years, I mentioned how she liked the theater. She was very interested in going to the opera and the theater. She had an active social life. That's a little bit about her, but I think there's a opportunity for a whole new book just about Hildreth Meire herself and her personality. Yes?
Is 1 Wall Street, the Irving Trust building, has that been changed, or is it still?
The Irving Trust, well, it became Bank of New York Mellon. And they sold the building a couple years ago. It was purchased by Macklowe Properties, a developer in New York, and the building is being converted into a residence. I was there a couple months ago and had a hard hat tour. It was a really hard hat tour. I think they thought they were going to be a little further along than they were. The building, there are two parts of that building. There's the earlier part from the Deco era. There's a part that was added in the 60s. The Deco building is landmarked. So anything that's done to that building has to be reviewed. But they're doing a very sympathetic restoration of that building. The Red Room, it is not an interior landmark in New York, so it's not protected, but Macklowe certainly has no plans to demolish it or alter it greatly, and they have told me that it's going to be upscale retail, and they said they haven't signed on the dotted line yet, so they can't say for sure, but I have heard Cartier mentioned. But what will be really nice is that was a private banking room, and you really couldn't get in there, especially after 9/11. You couldn't even get up to the windows and look inside. And now, when it becomes a retail establishment, provided you can get by the Cartier guards, if that's who it goes to, anybody could go in there. So you'll be able to walk in and see it. It is a breathtaking space.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes? Back.
I have a question that I just noticed, which is that except for one photograph face on that when she was 28 years old, every other photograph of her was her profile looking at the side. It's just too noticeable. You just shook your head in a way that, oh yes, there's something behind that. So I'll just let you take.
Well, I can't say that there's something behind it, but I was speaking to someone, and now I can't remember. Was it Allison, that we were talking about the profiles? Yes, Shoshana. We were talking about that, and she pointed out, oh, it's profiles, and I see so many other women in profile, and was that the style of the day? And I don't know, but yes, you're right. Anything you want to add?
Oh, no, this isn't a future research topic. Were all people photographed in profile then, or was it just artistic women? We have to find out.
Yeah, we don't know for sure, but something to start to look into. Yeah, it's interesting you noticed that. Yes?
I was thunderstruck to learn that she was the designer of the renowned mosaics in the St. Louis Cathedral, the Basilica of St. Louis. Did she design all the mosaics?
She designed almost all of them. I know I showed you 2 examples, but there are mosaics all over the Cathedral Basilica. Because she died when she was working on that design, one of her assistants finished one, I think there's several domes there, finished one of the domes. I'm not sure which one it is now, but she was able to complete most of it, or it was completed according to her designs. But she was commissioned to do the whole project, and she didn't finish one because of her death.
What scale would she work on?
In terms, she started with very, very small drawings, and she would work on these pieces of paper. They were all wound up into rolls, and they were only like about this high. And she'd do a very small sketch, and then she'd gradually enlarge it and enlarge it and enlarge it. And the final one was full scale, because that's what the whoever was executing her design, that's what they worked for. Let me just say something about execution, about murals. Murals are done in reverse. So she would make these full-scale drawings, and then they would be cut into individual pieces. The drawings would be cut into pieces, and they would be numbered, and they would be assigned to different mosaicists, and then they would trace the design, and they'd work backwards. And so you had the design, the tesserae delivered on a pallet, and what they would do is they were glued to a paper, and they would take the design and flip it over and put it on the wall, and then attach it with mortar. And so it was right side up when it was installed, but they actually worked in reverse. And the mosaicists were really just as talented as the designers to be able to do that. There's someone back there? Mm-hmm.
Yes, is any of her work here in Miami Beach? I mean, is it still?
No, there's nothing in Miami. It's highly concentrated in New York, but she does have work across the United States. And if you go to the website, hildrethmeire.org, they have an index by state. Okay.
Were they all of her design of the mosaic? Enormous number of mosaics. They're all by her?
All the ones, yes, on the arch, and then I didn't show the arc, but the arc is also covered with mosaics that she designed. Yeah, she did all of them.
So the man was also selected and put in a new prayer book, so it's preserved as a prayer book. And those mosaics in particular by her.
Oh, great.
How did you get interested in her?
In 2005, I believe, I attended the World Congress on Art Deco. The main Congress was in New York. Prior to that, there was a pre-tour in Washington, D.C. And we went to the Municipal Center with that terracotta frieze. So that was the first work that I saw that I knew was by Hildreth Meire. And then during the conference, her daughter spoke. And I just felt like this woman was calling to me, and her work was so beautiful. And at the time I was working on a different book, a book about an architect, and I didn't have time to really pursue it. But when that was finished, I decided I'm gonna look into this Hildreth Meire. By that time, their organization had formed. I got in touch with her daughter, and I originally started just with an article about her, and then they put me in touch with another art historian who was curating an exhibition of Meire's work. This woman, Catherine Brower, my co-author, became interested in Meire because she lives in a building on East 61st Street in New York, and it used to be Hildreth Meire's apartment. She lives, and she was doing a history of the building, and she discovered this muralist lived in her apartment. So anyway, we teamed up and book with great help from her family.
that where you're from?
I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. Cincinnati, Ohio. And I live in Chicago now. Okay, well, I hope you all visit her work.